What is this gateway that we just saw, and why is it important for our data refresh? Well, for this, we first have to understand what a data refresh is in Power BI Pro. Because up to now, we followed this approach here, right? We connected Power BI Pro to our Power BI desktop file. With that, we loaded the report and the dataset into Power BI Pro, and we worked with this information. The typical use case, though, for such, projects is that the underlying source data might get updated. Imagine that we have revenue data for your company, maybe daily or weekly data, and every day you receive an updated version of your source file. Well, this would also mean that the information that we loaded into Power BI Pro also must be updated. And at the moment, this is not possible actually. We could, of course, publish the information again or reconnect Power BI Pro to Power BI Desktop. With that, the information from the source files would be reloaded, but that's, of course, not a practical approach. For this, we need something that manages our so-called refreshing process, because refreshing simply means that Power BI Pro again requests the data from Power BI Desktop and therefore from the source files. This refreshing process in the end is managed via so-called gateways. And depending on where your current Power BI desktop file and the underlying source files are located, you either need a so-called personal gateway or a standard gateway. In our case, as the files are stored on our computer, we would take the personal gateway to, basically refresh the information that we have on our machine in Power BI Pro. If you have a different scenario where your files are stored on a server, so not on your machine, then you would use this so-called standard or enterprise gateway to do the same thing to refresh the data. You can find out more about gateways on this page here. So powerbi.microsoft.com/gateway, link is attached to this video. And here you see that you have the standard mode and the personal mode, which can be both downloaded. We'll do that in a few seconds in Power BI Pro. And if you scroll down a bit, you see the differences between these two gateways. The core thing is that for our purpose here, this personal mode gateway is totally sufficient to see how a gateway works and to refresh our data. Therefore, let's close this window now, and here I am back in our error message that we just had. And before we now install the gateway, let's quickly inspect what we actually see right here. Because now we know that we are using the personal gateway, so not the enterprise or standard gateway. Therefore, we should make sure that our gateway is online. Well, for this, we should first close this menu here. And now we can see that we are, where are we now actually? Because we were redirected from Power BI Pro to this menu with this error. Well, if you check the URL, you can see that we are in the settings and here in the dataset settings. And to access the settings, if you remember back the beginning of this module, we can click onto these three points here and then go to the settings. Here we are now. And there we can find this, here we are. There we can find the settings once again. And if we click onto these settings, then we are exactly in this menu. Specifically, we've been here in this datasets menu. And in there, we can now check our gateway connection. And if we do that, we see that we have a problem because we don't have any personal gateways installed at the moment. We can do this right here with this option now. Alternatively, you also saw this at the beginning of this lecture, you can do this by going to download and download a data gateway right here. I'll stick to this option though now, so let's press install now. And this didn't work for me, let's try it again. Now it worked, so make sure to redo this in case the download doesn't start immediately. Now this takes a few seconds. The download is finished, so now go to the folder where you downloaded this file to. Here, it's important to use this executable file with the personal mode, so let's double click this. Now we are ready to install the gateway. We can change the path. I'm happy with the default one, and we accept the terms of use and the privacy statement and press install now. And we can actually close this here. Now you need to provide your email address, and important, this is the email address you use in your Power BI Pro account now. So make sure to enter this email. Now you should be able to select your account here, and you have to re-enter your password. And we have a problem here, so the gateway is not working perfectly. This sometimes happens. Let's first unselect this, help us improve the data here. We don't want to share too much information here. However, this can happen sometimes. So what you have to do is you simply have to go to next down here and then re-enter your email address, and then normally this should work. So that's a little bug that we sometimes experience. But when you do this again, as we can see it right here, now the gateway is online and it is ready to be used. So let's now close this menu here, and we see that the gateway is still not installed. So let's refresh that menu now. Now we see that we have a different error. So let's see, we have the gateway connection. This is working, so our personal gateway is up and running. This is working fine, but we have problem with our data source credentials. These are invalid, so we should update our credentials and try again. That's not a big problem at this stage. Here we only have to quickly update our credentials, meaning we make sure that Power BI Pro is allowed to access the source data. So let's click on to edit credentials and then simply select sign in for all these credentials again. So right here, right there, and also for the last one here. And now this looks all right. So we just had to reconfirm that we want to access this source data here. And with that, we made this work. One very important note at this stage. In this case, we only had to confirm that sign in of Power BI Pro to the source file. So we have to grant the access basically. If you're using the attached project file, make sure to change the path to the source files to the path on your machine. Because if you hover right here, for example, you can see that this is the path pointing towards the source file on my computer, right? But on your machine, you probably stored the source file in a different folder. So when you download the Power BI desktop file to your machine, change the path as shown in the second module. Afterwards, publish the data to Power BI Pro and everything works as shown here. In case you're stuck, you have to go back to the Power BI desktop file, change the path for all these 4 source files, and then publish the data again. That's what it is, unfortunately. We cannot change this path dynamically at the moment in Power BI Pro. However, we have the credentials set up correctly. This means if you go back to our workspace now, that's where it all started. And now press that refresh button here. Let's see. We don't get an error. We get this loading spinner here. So we see refresh is in progress. And this refresh process can take a while as we have, well, relatively big data, so no worries if this takes a few minutes. That's totally normal. Also the same case for me. I, of course, shortened that waiting time in the video in the post-production. Now the refresh was successful, and as you can see, we have now updated data here. But more importantly, you also see this next refresh option here, which is an NA. So we manually triggered the refresh now, but apparently we can also kind of schedule a refresh. And we can indeed do this with this schedule refresh option here. You can find it right here next to the data set, or alternatively, again here in the settings menu and then settings as we had it before. I'll just use this quicker access now by clicking on to schedule refresh. Now we are again in this menu. And here you can find schedule refresh down here. With this, we can now predefine refresh intervals where Power BI Pro requests the data again, and with that updates the data stored in Power BI Pro. So if we turn this to on, we can change the refresh frequency. In our case, this could be daily. We can change the time zone here. In my case, I will use Berlin here. It's the same actually, just to be very clear here. We can add another time, so we can add a specific time when this refresh should be done. So let's say it should be done at, let's say, 6:0 a.m. every day. Then we can say if anybody should be informed if the refresh fails. I would normally tick this box, but here for demonstration purposes, we can untick this box. And if we now press apply here, we see that the refresh schedule has been applied, and if we again go back to our workspace here, you can now see that the next refresh is planned in my case for tomorrow at 6 a.m. It's very important to note that we have the data stored locally on our computer. Therefore, the computer where the Power BI Gateway is installed and where the Power BI desktop file and the source files are located is running. If you turn off that machine, well, then you kind of have a problem, because then, of course, the schedule can't take place as the data cannot be accessed. So with this, if we now go back to the slides once again, We covered a lot here in our workspace. We saw how we can get the data to Power BI Pro into our workspace, we saw how datasets, reports, and dashboards work, and we saw how we can refresh data using gateways. What's missing now are the sharing options. So how can we share data from our workspace, so from our personal workspace, with other people? This is the next thing we'll have a look at.